Okay, hello. Today is May 24th, 2023, and we'll talk about a very important architect who lived both in the 19th century and in the 20th century. C.F. Charles, and then he has two other names, and I always had troubles to remember all the names. Usually he is known by this name, CFA Voysey, but C stands for Charles. So we could say Charles Voysey, born in 1857, so 30 years older than Le Corbusier, was born in 1887. Charles Francis Annesley Voysey, a little bit difficult for me at least. No, I don't have a good memory of names. Let's read a little bit about him. So Charles Francis Annesley Voysey, born, as you can see, on the 28th of May, 1857, and died in February 1941, was an English architect and furniture and textile designer. Voysey's early work was as a designer of wallpapers, fabrics, and furnishings in an arts and crafts style, and he made important contribution to the modern style. But paradoxically, he was actually against modernism, the British Art Nouveau style, and was recognized by the seminal The Studio magazine. He is renowned as the architect of several country houses. He was one of the first people to understand and appreciate the significance of industrial design. He has been considered one of the pioneers of modern architecture, a notion which he rejected, as I just said. His English domestic architecture draws heavily on vernacular rather than academic tradition, influenced by the ideas of Herbert Tudor Buckland and Augustus Pugin. Now, Augustus Pugin was a very interesting British architect from the 19th century who died mad at 40 after building countless churches. This man was madly in love with the Gothic and with the Gothic cathedral. He was, the ultimate archangel, as Kenneth Frampton would have said, of the neo-Gothic. And yes, he died at 40, apparently, with mental problems. But in some respects, he was a truly remarkable architect and cultural figure. And I think Pugin deserves study for various reasons. And he, as you read here, he influenced Voysey. Now, the Sanderson wallpaper factory from 1901 in Chiswick, which he designed, is named the Voysey House in his memory. But I would like to say something here, because as modern architects, we are taught to neglect completely textiles, ornament, fabrics, forgetting that actually the word architecture, the very word architecture, the second part of the word, meaning texture, comes from text, T-E-K-S or K-S, T-E-K-S, which in the Indo-European, in the Proto-Indo-European language meant to weave. To weave. So actually, the very word and all the ramifications of the word architecture, an architect, derive from to weave and textiles thus. So we still have words like urban fabric, yes, but we don't reflect enough about the importance of weaving for architecture. So, being preoccupied with textile work as an architect, it shouldn't be a shame, quite the opposite. Here he was, Voysey, in, I don't know who did this, the drawing. and a picture of him. So he lived actually in 2 centuries, half of the 19th century, almost half of the 20th century. Around 1885, a design for a cottage for Voysey himself. Well, this is rather, not unique, but rare, because, the shoemaker doesn't make shoes for himself. But let's see what he did. It's what is remarkable about Voysey is that indeed he found inspiration not in the academic tradition, but in the vernacular tradition. And this is why his buildings, although they are informed buildings of an educated and sophisticated architect, they have something rural about them. And this is actually part of the charm, or part of the reason of the charm of his buildings. And it makes me reflect also on the noblemen's villas of Andrea Palladio, which also pendulated rather precariously between the urban and the rural. This is also something I think to reflect on, because I think when you make a building in the city, if you can infuse that building with some kind of not so rural inspiration, you might bring in nature in a very desirable way, because I think we need nature badly these days. So maybe, in my maybe simplistic or even brutal way, I say the village is the future. Rurality is the future. Why? Because rurality is still close to nature. And we need nature badly. So maybe the city could find some kind of a, saving potion from rurality. In this sense, perhaps the village or rurality could contribute positively to our time. If we reconsider our relationship with them, and maybe this is also what Rem Koolhaas thought when he made his well-known the big show at the Guggenheim Museum some years ago, not too many years ago, dedicated entirely to rurality. And he even planted in front of the famous building by Frank Lloyd Wright, the Guggenheim Museum, a tractor. But let's look at the Voysey's works. So, he made this project, a cottage for himself. Now the word cottage is maybe, used with some poetical license, because it's not such a small building. And even if he was informed or inspired by tradition, or what we call tradition, which we should also reflect on the fact that the word tradition in English has the same etymological root, linguistic root, with the word treason. And so is in French, and so is in Romanian. So you could wonder, how come, tradition, which refers to the past, a past we revere, we respect, and we do not change, we do not modify, could have the same linguistic root as the word treason. And in my opinion, tradition, in order to remain alive, I almost said become alive, needs a percentage of tradition, of treason, a percentage of change. So you have continuity and break or innovation. You could say, comfortably, tradition and innovation. What would be the innovation in the case of the CFA Voysey? Maybe the simplicity of the design. It is informed by tradition and by the vernacular tradition, But the simplicity of the lines, the continuity of the lines, you can tell that this is an educated architecture. This is not, a peasant's architecture of someone, who just built spontaneously without any kind of, a priori assumptions or planning or, composition. There is a composition here. And the plans also show clearly, the sensitivity and the knowledge of an architect in the post-Albertian tradition. Because before Alberti, in the Middle Ages, the architect was actually anonymously present within the group of the craftsmen who erected either cities or villages or cathedrals. The architect as we know him or her, was born approximately with Alberti, meaning the architect, the white-collar architect at his desk or in front of his computer or her desk, far away from the noise and dust of the building site. But before Alberti, Brunelleschi, who was considered by someone as the last carpenter, was almost living on the building site. He was not distanced from the act of building the building, cozily, and comfortably protected by the warmth of his studio. So this is the cottage, the so-called cottage that Voysey tried to build for himself. The executed cottage for Michael H. Lakin, Station Road, Bishops, Itchington, 1888. You see, the architecture is not very different from what Voysey planned for himself. A distinctive feature of the works of Voysey is the fact that you see how he brings the windows on the top floor just underneath the cornice, and it's possible that these windows have a taller parapet, meaning the distance from the bottom of the window and the slab, the floor, because you can tell it's quite a dimension here. It's even bigger than the window almost. So, I am not a great expert in Voysey. I'm not going to, try to analyze too much the buildings. This is just the first impression. And I noticed that in other buildings by him, he does the same thing here as well. Another thing is, in this kind of architecture, if you allow the ivy to attack the brick walls in general, the effect is always positive. And I think, this was practiced in England a lot. Many buildings are covered by ivy. And now, these days, we flirt with the idea of vertical gardens, and we climb with plants on our buildings. But there is a problem here. The plants climb on brick, while often on our buildings, the poor plants climb or are forced to climb on concrete walls. I personally think it's an assumption, it's a thought I have, it's a feeling I have that the plants connect better with brick, which is also earth, than with concrete. I think these are very fine buildings. Again, because they situate themselves somewhere between urbanity and rurality. wherever they are placed. I'm not referring to the location. I'm referring to the architectural air or attributes that they emanate. CFA Voysey. And again, you see here that this dimension, from the bottom of the window to the top of the other window is quite big. This is uncommon, and also, the roof comes all the way down to the top of the window. Although it's possible that the room continues a little bit, but this is not seen in the elevation. On the other hand, although Voysey protested, having anything to do with modernity, the truth is this is not quite a vernacular architecture. It does have a simplicity that one would connect with what we call modern or modernity. But all in all, we see here, in almost all the cases with Voysey, an inviolable intermingling between nature and architecture. And well, this is also because of locations, because they're either outside of cities or in rural areas. But you can tell that this is an architect for whom nature was very, very important, in as much as textile work was very, very important. If we can do something to bring nature as much as possible within our settlements, urban or otherwise, it would be great. We need badly nature because we need badly more oxygen. We need badly more ozone, and trees, we can only be grateful to them and abstain from cutting them unnecessarily. The trees are very, very generous. They give us ozone, they give us oxygen. And what do we do? For them, we cut them down. We cut them down to make who knows what. Paper, for example, which sooner or later arrives in the garbage can. Essentially, this means cutting down trees and sending them directly to the garbage can. Sad. And then we complain that we have climate change and that we are overwhelmed by all kinds of crises and that we have polluted cities and so on. Well, who cuts down the trees? We, the humans. Nobody else. And now we try to replace concrete with timber, but timber doesn't pollute, but timber means concrete. Cut down trees. And if you cut down the trees, it's not good either, at all. I like very much the gardens of England because, as opposed to the French gardens, they are almost wild. They are allowed, nature is allowed to grow as it feels like growing. Or the interventions of the landscape designer is minimal or very subtle. The British landscape designer doesn't impose a formal garden design, allows the garden to manifest its so-called romantic spirit, like here. Now, who wouldn't live in such a house? I know I would. Now, Voysey was named as belonging to the arts and crafts movement. In a way, it is correct. But what does the arts and crafts movement mean? Well, as the name says it, you have an architecture where art and craft come together in the act of building the building. And I don't think this understanding of the meeting or the collaboration between art and craft takes place in our time. In generally speaking, it doesn't. But maybe, a return to craft, just as Walter Gropius asked for in his Bauhaus Manifesto in 1919, would be great for all of us. But craft is not just about, in fact, it's not about making beautiful drawings on a drafting board. It's about knowing how to work with wood, with iron, with ceramics, with textiles. That is craft. But anyway, I included this short fragment description of this so-called cottage by CFA Voysey, architect. There is a simplicity and character about this work which will commend it to architects and painters. On a good side, the effect would be most pleasing, and where there were a score or two of such houses to be had near London, we should expect them to be occupied as soon as built. The one we illustrate is being erected at Bishop's Itchington near Warwick. It is constructed in stock bricks, built up in cement with rough cast on the outside face and plastered in cement inside. The rough cast is cream colored, the woodwork is painted a peacock blue, and the roofs are covered with red tiles. The hall and passages, coat and hat room, chimney corners, and porch are paved with red brick on edge. All the walls are painted with a height of 6 feet, to a height of 6 feet. This is rather interesting because these days we do not do this sort of thing where we paint only to a certain height. We usually paint the wall in white from bottom to ceiling. Where a picture rail is fixed, the frieze above is finished in distemper. No room exceeds 8 feet in height, and every room has a 9 inches by 9 inches exhaust air flue at each end. This is not at all a big height, 8 feet. It's like 2 meters and 40 centimeters. So these are the plans. Now, I like to think that the living room has a bigger height than 8 feet. And as you can see, all the rooms are oriented towards south, and towards the north, just some smaller rooms on the second floor and, circulation and so on. So yes, the whole house is actually oriented towards south. South, and the big master bedroom east. And yes, the left bedroom, small window towards west. Walnut Tree Farm from 1890, originally Walnut Tree Farm, also known as Barnett Tree House, now known as Barnett Farmhouse. Here it is, a drawing, and here is the building. Not bad. Now the hardcore modernists would protest and would say this is too traditional, this is too what are we doing with the sloping roofs, but I'm not sure the hardcore modernist is right, because I think a good work doesn't matter if it belongs or not to another century, is a good work, and this is a good work. CFA Voysey. Now, it's true that windows are not the modernistic windows that we are accustomed to. You know, they are not excessively horizontal. They are divided into small pieces. You know, so it's clearly a different kind of window that the one we are accustomed to see. But we read just the other day a small fragment from Le Corbusier from his book Journey to the East, when at 22, Le Corbusier, none other than Le Corbusier, made a very surprising statement that, the new architecture that tries to replace, the so-called traditional architecture is not something. I mean, these are not exactly the words he used, but the message was that there was a lot of value in the past architecture and in the traditional architecture and in the vernacular architecture, that an architecture obsessed by the new perhaps should abstain from replacing. This was the message, a very surprising message considering that it came from Le Corbusier, which means he was rather ambivalent. I mean, he recognized the value of what was good in what we call the vernacular culture. And like this car, a Volvo, an old Volvo, Swedish. Well, when the Americans bought the company Volvo, they destroyed the car, an excellent car that the Swedes made. I think now it's again made in Sweden, but for a number of years it was made by the Americans, and it was not the same car. So again, if it's something genuinely good in what we call tradition, we should keep and not destroy, not ruin. But what do we see here? Again, we see an architecture that is distant from the city, and this air of a farm, of rurality, of a village life. I think anyone would enjoy, actually, even those who love the city. Now, the interior is rather too sweet for my taste. A little bit of gingerbread house. But I don't know if Voysey, furnished the building in this way, or, the inhabitants, is very possible. And they change hands and so on. So the furnishings are not necessarily expressing the architect's ideas. CFA Voysey. House at Bedford Park, Chiswick, West London. It's the white one. Surprise, surprise. Now this one is almost modern. I mean, if you remove the sloping roof, it's almost like an Adolf Loos building. And if you do some changes to the windows, but otherwise it's a cubical white building with a sloping roof. So if Voysey protested when he was called a modern architect, based on this building, maybe he would have been a little bit more mellow in his self-assessment. And as you can see, that's how he designed it. Although this drawing is unclear because of the resolution, and I apologize. Anyway, so Walnut Tree Farm have certain, and this other house at Bedford Park have certain novel features that became characteristic of Voysey's designs. Walnut Tree Farm shows for the first time the lively coloring that was to become typical of his houses. Whitened rough cast, bright green exterior woodwork, oversized bright green water butts, bright green tubs of bay trees, and bright red curtains at the windows. At Bedford Park, the innovation consisted of a very simplified classical or Queen Anne details, a slate roof, and practical metal frames and stone surrounds of the windows. This was just the building that we looked at. Now, what is this? Another almost typical Voysey house. I mean, studying a little bit one or two buildings by him, we kind of know how a building by CFA Voysey looks like. Unafraid to assume nature on its walls, climbing happily on the brick walls. But there are some idiosyncratic accents, like this entrance here, rather unexpected. And plenty of massive chimneys. I think this round window here above the entrance is also on the cover of a book published on Voysey by Phaidon Press, because it's a rather unique architectural element or detail, if we are to call it so. Now, it's very possible that in this house now lives a famous rock and roller, or, the people who have the money and who are, in the avant-garde of music mainly, they love old Victorian buildings. Almost like a paradox, in as much as the paradox is that in Silicon Valley, all those high-tech geniuses live in very conventional traditionalist houses with pitched roofs and verandas. But they are the great innovators who want to bring us to the moon. No asphalt, that's a good thing, as long as huge vehicles do not pass by to create a huge cloud of dust, as I know very well could happen exactly where I am speaking from now. Interesting house. You look at the monumentality of the of the triangle in the main elevation of the roof. He could have ruined that monumental blank triangle with I don't know, maybe a large window or something like this, but he didn't. Maybe even Frank Lloyd Wright found some inspiration in his earlier work from this house or from something similar to this house, because I saw it's a well-known building by Frank Lloyd Wright in Oak Park near Chicago, which has something very similar to this condition. I forgot the name of that house though. But in this architecture of straight lines and triangles, the appearance of curvatures, you know, like here and also on the long elevation, provokes a disruption, a compositional disruption, and thus an innovation. Because here, I mean, look at this delicious fragment of an elevation. You know, it's almost in a different spirit of the whole house. Just here, if it is a house within a house. Interesting. If this was not quite like this, but if we consider these two elements, I forgot how they are called actually technically in architecture. It makes me think a little bit of the Santa Maria Novella in Florence by Alberti, which is a sacred architecture, and here is a domestic architecture. But you know, you could use influences coming from either side into the opposite. Very interesting, this impure insertion of a different kind of architecture as opposed to what generally the building has. Although there are also curvatures here. Anyway, it is a relief to see such houses which are not with our obsessive white walls. You know, it's, you see the walls, they are affected by the elements, they are affected by the vegetation that climbs on them. They are alive, actually. You know, they are not white manifestos. And I think that's a quality. And the interior, it might not be very modern, but no one would say that it would be unpleasant to live in. And we see the continuation of the appearance of the curvatures inside as well. Now we end the presentation, this rather short and imperfect presentation on CFA Voysey with some of his designs. Let's look at these wallpaper designs. Again, it's about ornament, clearly. What architect today would design wallpaper? But in the 19th century, with or without the influence of William Morris, architects designed with great pleasure ornamental wallpapers. And even Adolf Loos, who protested vehemently against ornament, used the ornament of marble, the natural ornament of marble. Yes, he didn't use the ornament, the artificial ornament of wallpapers, but he used the ornament of marble. With our, you know, late modernist cynicism, we certainly dismiss wallpaper. But at that time, it was not at all dismissed. And even here we see a nostalgia, a longing for nature, for flowers, for plants, for birds, for butterflies, for insects. Were they too sentimental? Maybe they were sentimental, but I don't know if they were too sentimental. In my opinion, we are insufficiently sentimental in our time. But then this shouldn't come as a surprise, since, you know, we are planning to move to Mars, where there is no gravity or not sufficient gravity. Look at this bird here. you know, a wallpaper created by an educated architect, one of the good architects of Great Britain. Why did he do this? Why not? I wonder how many students in architecture have the nerve to draw a bird on the branch of a tree in their projects or in his or her project. I don't think too many. Maybe a plane on the sky, but not a bird on a branch of a tree. No, that would be too sentimental. And I end the presentation with some furniture designs by CFA Voysey. Some chairs. Architects love to design chairs, and he made no exception. Well crafted, solid, probably heavy, and again, probably rather expensive if you are to buy it today. Solid wood, of course. These are not IKEA pieces of furniture, no. Now, why did he include a narrative little illustration here in the middle? We wouldn't do something like this today at all. We would consider it in bad taste or excessively naive. CFA Voysey. That's it. So let's wish him happy birthday. Thank you.